In the twilight of a dying empire, when Rome's marble streets echoed not with triumph, but with whispers of forgotten gods, one man rose to challenge the tide of time itself. His name was Julian, the last pagan emperor of Rome, the final flame of a faith the world had chosen to extinguish. The world remembers him as the Apostate, the emperor who dared defy Christ. But history remembers more. It remembers the man who sought to resurrect Olympus, who raised altars to the old gods in defiance of the cross, and who dared to dream that the ancient power of Rome could still burn bright in a Christian world. The year was 331 AD. Rome's golden age had long faded into dust. The empire was vast but weary, torn between faith and power, between the old order of the gods and the rising shadow of the new. From the ashes of Constantine's dynasty, a young boy named Flavius Claudius Julianus was born into a family drenched in blood and betrayal. When Constantine the Great, the first Christian emperor, died, his sons tore the empire apart, and with them purged their rivals in a river of crimson. Julian's father, Julius Constantius, was among the slaughtered. His mother died soon after. The boy survived only by miracle, or perhaps by fate. The orphan Julian was placed under the care of tutors loyal to the new Christian regime. By all appearances, he was a loyal servant of Christ, obedient, quiet, unthreatening. But within a storm brewed. In secret, Julian studied the works of Plato, Homer, and the Neoplatonists, ancient texts that whispered of divine order, cosmic harmony, and the forgotten majesty of the gods. He read of Zeus, Athena, Apollo, not as myths, but as metaphysical truths. Truths the church sought to erase. At night, by the dim light of an oil lamp, Julian would copy passages of forbidden philosophy onto scraps of parchment. He believed that the gods had not died, they had merely been silenced. The empire's heart, once filled with temples and sacrifices, had grown cold beneath the shadow of the cross. Julian vowed that one day he would bring back the light. Years passed, and fate called. The Emperor Constantius II, Julian's cousin, faced rebellion in Gaul. Rome's armies were crumbling, morale shattered. In desperation, Constantius appointed Julian, a scholar, not a soldier, as Caesar. It was a death sentence disguised as promotion. But history has a taste for irony. The quiet philosopher became a warrior. Against all odds, Julian proved brilliant on the battlefield. His leadership was fearless, his strategies inspired. In the freezing lands of Gaul, he rallied his troops and crushed the barbarian tribes that had long plagued Rome. His men adored him, calling him Julianus Augustus, emperor in all but name. The Senate began to whisper. The gods, it seemed, had chosen their champion. But beneath the surface of military glory lay a deeper secret. Julian was no longer hiding his faith. He had begun performing secret sacrifices to the old gods, rites outlawed by imperial decree. He communed with philosophers who spoke of divine fire, of the soul's ascent through the stars. He began to write essays against the Christians, mocking their doctrines, praising the wisdom of ancient Hellas. To the public, he was still Caesar. To the initiated, he was something else, the rebirth of pagan Rome. The church feared him. The bishops of Constantinople watched with unease as Julian's fame spread like wildfire, and in the dim corridors of the palace, beneath frescoes of saints and angels, men whispered, "He is the one they warned us about, the one who will bring back the gods." Then came the turning point. In 361 AD, Constantius Siver died under mysterious circumstances while marching against Julian. Some said fever, others said poison. Regardless, Julian was now emperor, the last pagan to sit upon the throne of Rome. His first act was not vengeance, but transformation. He reopened the temples, restored the priesthoods, and decreed freedom of religion across the empire. But his definition of freedom was poetic justice. He stripped the Christian church of its wealth, returning its treasures to the temples it had desecrated. Across the empire, the fires of the old gods blazed once more. Smoke rose from long dead altars. Hymns to Jupiter, Apollo, and Isis filled the air. It was as if the empire had awoken from a centuries-long dream, a pagan resurrection in the age of crosses. Yet, Julian was no simple fanatic. His vision was not merely religious, it was philosophical, even mystical. He saw the universe as a hierarchy of divine powers, gods, souls, stars, all bound in harmony. Christianity, to him, had broken that harmony by reducing the cosmos to one jealous deity. In his writings, Julian called Christ, the Gallion, a mortal who had confused men with false humility. He dreamed not of conquest, but of cosmic balance restored. Still, his dream made him dangerous. The bishops called him Antichrist. The people called him the philosopher-emperor, and in the Vatican's deepest vaults, if legend is to be believed, there are letters, lost to time, between Julian and the pagan priests of Alexandria, describing rituals and visions forbidden by imperial law. Some whisper that among the secret archives lies a text, the Hymns of Julian, a series of odes to Helios, the sun god, believed to contain hidden knowledge of divine unity. Historians dismiss it as myth, but the Vatican has never denied possessing such manuscripts. And that silence speaks louder than any record. Imagine the scene: a young emperor standing alone before the statue of Apollo, sunlight spilling through broken marble. He kneels, not to Christ, but to the sun, whispering words that have not been spoken aloud for centuries. The torches flicker, the air hums with invisible energy, and Julian, last of the pagans, calls to the divine as his ancestors once did. The sound echoes through time. For a moment, Rome's ancient gods stir. But fate, as ever, is cruel to dreamers. Julian's reign burned bright but brief, a comet streaking across Rome's darkened sky. His reforms came swift and relentless. He sought not merely to revive the old gods, but to reform them, to cleanse paganism of decadence and superstition. He envisioned a new, moral pagan empire, guided by philosophy rather than ritual, truth rather than fear. Temples reopened, yes, but their priests were now scholars. Julian demanded purity, devotion, intellect. He banned animal sacrifices, promoted vegetarianism, and filled libraries with classical works once condemned as heresy. His court in Constantinople became a sanctuary of wisdom. Philosophers, poets, astrologers, and mystics gathered under the light of Helios, the god Julian claimed as his divine patron. In his writings, Julian called Helios the king of all, the living fire that unites gods and men. He saw himself not as emperor, but as Helios, earthly emissary, a philosopher, king chosen to restore cosmic order. Some said he wore a secret amulet inscribed with solar symbols, said to glow faintly when exposed to light. His enemies whispered darker things, that he practiced magic, communed with spirits, and held rites beneath the moon where ancient hymns echoed through the marble halls. Christian chroniclers painted him as possessed, a man who bargained with demons to challenge Christ. Yet others saw something nobler, even tragic, a man born in the wrong age, clinging to beauty as the world turned toward darkness. His war was not just political, it was spiritual. The empire stood divided. Christian officials refused his decrees, bishops defied his edicts, and the people murmured in confusion. To the common man, the emperor's return to the gods of old felt like a ghost walking among the living. Paganism was no longer the faith of Rome. It was a relic. Still, Julian pressed forward. He stripped Christian bishops of their privileges and forbade them from teaching classical literature. To Julian, allowing Christians to interpret Homer and Plato was like handing sacred fire to those who denied its divinity. Let them learn, he wrote, from their fishermen and carpenters. It was a war of culture, a battle for Rome's soul fought not with swords, but with ideas. But power breeds resistance. In the shadows of the churches, a silent war unfolded. Christian scribes spread rumors of blasphemy and debauchery. They claimed Julian sacrificed virgins, drank from golden chalices of blood, and built altars of flame in his chambers. Lies, perhaps, but effective ones. The empire's faith had shifted too far to be turned back by reason. And yet, Julian refused cruelty. Unlike his predecessors, he did not persecute Christians by the sword. Let them hate me, he said, but let them see that their God will not defend them. Still, he could not resist the temptation of destiny. In 363 AD, he marched east to Persia, a campaign meant to rival Alexander, to carve glory for Rome once more. But many saw in this decision a fatal arrogance. As his army crossed the Tigris, omens appeared. Comets, eclipses, whispers of doom. Priests begged him to turn back. He refused. Under a blazing sun, Julian led his legions deep into Persian lands, one yielding even as supplies dwindled and the enemy burned the fields ahead. One night, witnesses claimed he performed a private sacrifice to Helios, standing bare-chested in the desert, his arms raised to the dawn. The next day, he rode into battle without armor. The fighting was fierce, dust, blood, and chaos. As the sun reached its zenith, Julian was struck by a spear that pierced his side. No one knew from where it came. His guards rushed to him, but he waved them off, pressing his hand to the wound, staring at the blood as if reading an omen. Some say he whispered, "Thou hast conquered, Galilean." Whether he meant it in despair or irony, no one knows. Julian died that night, beneath a sky filled with stars, his face turned toward the east, toward Helios. When his body was returned to Rome, the priests of the old gods wept, but the bishops rejoiced. The dream of a pagan revival died with him. His successor, Jovian, restored Christianity as the empire's official faith. Temples were shuttered once more, his writings burned, his name cursed from the pulpits. And yet something lingered. Whispers of Julian's teachings did not vanish, they went underground. In Alexandria, secret cults continued his worship of Helios. In Athens, philosophers preserved his essays, hiding them beneath the floors of the academy. Centuries later, fragments of his works surfaced against the Galileans, the hymns to the gods, and the orations. But others vanished, erased by decree. Some historians believe those lost texts contained revelations. Julian's mystical doctrines on the soul, reincarnation, and divine union. The Church labeled them heretical, others forbidden, yet, curiously, in the 17th century, when scholars gained limited access to the Vatican Archives, they found references to Juliani codices, unpublished works attributed to the last pagan emperor. Their descriptions were vague, treatises on divine hierarchies and the mysteries of the sun. No copies have ever been seen. The Vatican denies possessing them. But the pattern is old, familiar. Many texts once thought lost, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Enoch, or the Sibylline oracles, were discovered centuries later, hidden away in deserts, caves, or monasteries. Who is to say that somewhere, beneath the polished floors of the apostolic palace, Julian's forbidden writings do not lie, sealed in leather, waiting for light? Imagine the implications. Philosophies that bridge paganism and Christianity, doctrines that speak of the divine spark within man not as sin, but as destiny. Perhaps that is what frightened the early church most, Julian's belief that man could ascend to godhood not through faith, but through knowledge. For centuries, the legacy of Julian haunted the corridors of power, not as a ghost of failure, but as a question that refused to die. The Church tried to erase him, Yet his name lingered in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, his ideas resurfaced in Renaissance philosophy, his dream of divine harmony reborn in secret societies and mystic orders that claimed descent from ancient wisdom. Some whispered that the Hermetic texts of the 15th century, the very writings that inspired alchemists and scholars, echoed Julian's lost philosophy, that his words lived on beneath layers of allegory. To them, Julian was not merely a fallen emperor, but the first initiate of a forgotten age, a man who saw the divine not as distant, but woven into the fabric of reality. They called him Julian the Light-Bearer. It is said that during the Middle Ages, a small sect of monks within the church, known only as the Custodes Solis, protected his writings in secret. They believed Julian's vision could reconcile the divine duality, to merge Christ and Helios into one eternal light. Their traces vanish after the Inquisition. Yet scattered letters found centuries later in the archives of Bologna speak of books from the days of the Apostate, locked within the deepest vaults of Rome. These letters were signed by men who feared not demons, but discovery. When the Vatican Archives were reorganized under Pope Paul V in the early 1600s, vast sections were sealed, forbidden even to scholars. Among them, certain records labeled De Rebus Julianis were indexed, then quietly removed from public catalogues. No official record explains what they contained. Some say they were merely imperial correspondences. Others whisper that they contained Julian's final writings, his reflections on the soul's immortality, and his vision of the divine fire that unites all things. Whether myth or truth, the silence that follows such whispers is often the most revealing part of history, because silence is not ignorance, it is protection. What could be so dangerous in the writings of a man long dead? What secrets could threaten the faith of billions? Perhaps Julian's heresy was never his paganism. Perhaps it was his understanding that faith and reason were not enemies, that the divine was not beyond reach, but within man himself. A truth that could liberate or destroy, and maybe that is why his story still matters. Because Julian was not merely a ruler fighting to restore old gods. He was a philosopher fighting to restore balance between the mortal and the divine. His tragedy was that he lived in a time when the world could no longer understand him. After his death, paganism vanished like breath on glass, but the questions he asked about power, belief, and truth remained. His vision of a cosmos bound by divine light outlived empires, resurfacing in the minds of those who dared to question the boundaries of faith. Artists painted him as a fallen angel, philosophers hailed him as the last philosopher-king, and theologians denounced him as Satan reborn. But the truth, like all history, lies somewhere between. In the modern age, the Vatican Archives remain one of the most secretive repositories on earth. 5 kilometers of shelves buried beneath Rome, housing letters, codices, and scrolls dating back over 1,000 years. Only a fraction of their contents have ever been revealed. Historians who have glimpsed their indexes speak of restricted catalogues, materials so sensitive they require papal approval to view. Among them, names like Julianus appear, referenced, but sealed. We do not know what rests behind those locked iron doors. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. The myths persist, whispers of lost treatises on the divine sun, diagrams of cosmic geometry, ancient hymns describing a union of gods and light. The Church dismisses these as fantasy, but sometimes the most enduring myths are built upon fragments of truth. If Julian's writings do lie hidden beneath the Vatican, then they remain what they have always been, forbidden knowledge, trapped between faith and fear. Knowledge that could reveal how close humanity once came to a very different world. one where gods and men shared the same light. Picture it a dark hall lined with marble, lit only by the golden gleam of oil lamps. Dust motes drift through beams of light. A hooded archivist unlocks a door, steps into the silence, and opens a box untouched for centuries. Inside, a scroll, brittle, faintly perfumed with age. The ink still glimmers with traces of gold, its title, Hymns to Helios. And there, in fading letters, the words of Julian, "The divine fire is not above us, but within us. Seek it, and you will find the sun eternal." The music swells, a haunting choir beneath the toll of distant bells, echoing through time. The screen fades to black, leaving only his name, and the question that lingers still, what else lies hidden beneath Rome? What truths sleep in the dark, waiting for the light? If this story of forgotten gods and forbidden history stirred you, subscribe to Unsolved History, because here we don't just tell history, we awaken it.